I signed the divorce papers while my son was sleeping on my chest. He was 3 years old, small enough to not understand what was being taken from him, but old enough to feel it. His tiny breath rose and fell on my skin while I held a pen that would give everything away. At the time, I thought I was protecting him. I thought if I signed quickly, quietly, without a fight, maybe he wouldn't have to live through the mess. I thought this was just love ending badly. It wasn't. It was war, and I didn't even know I'd already lost the first battle. I met David when I was 27. Back then, I was sharp, driven. I had a growing career in strategic branding, a solid apartment, a 6-year plan. David came in like a thunderstorm, loud, fast, confident. He said I was intimidating and refreshing. I said he was too much. And then, like every clever man who knows how to play, with certainty he made too much feel like exactly what I deserved. We were married a year later. He convinced me to leave my job 6 months in. Not directly, of course. He said things like, "You're too brilliant to be stuck in meetings all day. I want to build something with you, or let me take the financial pressure off so you can really dream." So I did. I gave up my career. We had Theo a year later. David started a company. I helped branding name pitch deck website. Everything. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't even think to. I believed in him, in us. Then came Julia. She was my best friend since college. We survived roommates from hell bad boyfriends, a 3-day train ride to Montreal that ended with both of us hungover and stranded. When her job fell through and her lease ended, I told her to come stay with us as long as you need. She'd been like family forever. Theo adored her. She called herself his bonus mom. I didn't see the way he clung to her more than to me. I didn't question when she bought a second toothbrush just in case. I didn't react when David laughed more around her than with me. Why would I? Julia was my sister in everything but blood. And David, well, he was my husband, the father of my child, the man I left everything for. But one night I got up around 2 a.m. Theo had a cough, and I was heading to the kitchen for his syrup. As I passed David's office, the door wasn't shut all the way. Inside, Julia stood in front of David. He tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. She smiled. Their foreheads touched. No kiss, no groping, nothing sexual. Worse, it was intimate. The kind of familiarity that only grows in shadows. The kind that requires time and intent. I didn't say anything. I went back to bed. And I laid there awake, watching the ceiling while Julia's laugh echoed faintly from down the hall. 2 days later, David sat me down in the kitchen. He said he wanted a divorce. He spoke calmly, as if reading from a script. "It's not Julia," he said. "I think we've just grown in different directions. I want to keep things respectful. For Theo." He handed me the papers. Asset split 60-40 in his favor. Theo would live with him for stability. I'd get alternate weekends. He kept the house, the cars, the company technically under his name since day one. My head was pounding. My body was screaming. To object, to fight, to throw the chair. But instead, I nodded. I signed. I wanted to believe he wasn't trying to destroy me. That he still respected me. That maybe if I made this easy, we could at least co-parent with dignity. That was the last lie I told myself. Because 3 days later, Julia didn't move in. She didn't have to. She simply stopped pretending. She stood at the stove wearing my apron, flipping Theo's pancakes like she'd done it 1,000 times. She sat at the head of the table, my usual spot, pouring David coffee with a smile too wide to be innocent. Theo called her Julesy. He kissed her cheek. And when I stopped by to drop off his favorite toy, he asked if I was staying for long this time. Julia didn't look at me. David thanked me for being mature. And when I walked back to my car, I realized I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was being replaced in every room, every role, every version of the life I built. Later that night, Julia posted a photo online. David, Theo, her, all three smiling, matching outfits, caption new beginnings. Grateful for this beautiful life. I stared at the screen, not in rage, not even in grief, just numb. And beneath that numbness, something colder. Not fire, not revenge, not yet. Just the slow understanding that I had signed something far worse than a divorce. I had signed myself out of a world they had already redrawn without me. After the divorce, I thought the worst was over. Turns out losing a husband is one kind of pain. Losing your child and still being alive, to watch it happen is something else entirely. The first weekend I was supposed to have Theo, they didn't show up. I waited. I made his favorite breakfast banana pancakes shaped like stars. I fluffed the pillows on the fold-out mattress, set his dinosaur pajamas by the bed, even laid out the storybook I'd been practicing with silly voices. But there was no knock, no text, no call. At 11:15, I finally dialed David. Straight to voicemail. Julia picked up an hour later. Her voice was calm, icy. Theo wasn't feeling well. We didn't want to make the drive. He's better staying in his environment. We'll try next time. They didn't try. I contacted my lawyer. He explained that while the custody agreement was technically joint, David had been granted primary custody. My visitation was non-enforceable without modification, especially if they cited health or emotional safety. And David came to court prepared. Medical notes, therapy history, Julia's written statement about my emotional instability, prolonged fatigue, and irrational behavior. All true in fragments, but never the whole picture. Not the complicated pregnancy, not the RSV nights, not the way he could only sleep if his ear pressed against my chest. That kind of love doesn't live in case files. What did live there? A missed seatbelt buckle, a time I cried in front of him. 2 prescriptions, one for sleep, one for anxiety. The court didn't see a mother. They saw a margin of error. For the next month, I didn't see my son. Every weekend, a new excuse. He's got a cold. We're out of town. There's a birthday party. I tried to FaceTime David. No answer. Julia called instead. Theo was in the background watching cartoons. When I asked to speak to him, she smiled. He's not really in the mood. He's had a long day, but I'll tell him you said hi. Then she hung up. The next week, I sent a formal letter through counsel requesting consistent visitation. David responded with a counter-motion petitioning for a restraining order. The grounds repeated emotional harassment, erratic behavior, obsession with custody, outside agreed terms. He submitted screenshots, desperate messages I'd sent. Please let me see him. He needs his mother. I'm begging you. The court didn't care that I hadn't threatened anyone. They saw frequency, not intention, and that was enough. But it wasn't the hearing that broke me, not the motions, not the silence. It was one call, one moment. I called hoping to catch him before bedtime. He picked up. His voice came through small, distracted, "Hi, Miss Rachel." That was the name of a YouTube teacher he liked. He didn't recognize my voice. He didn't call me mom. That night, I collapsed in the shower, fully clothed. I didn't cry. I screamed, not at them, at myself, for letting this happen, for believing I could play nice with people who were rewriting my life without asking. My parents took me in. My mom cooked. My dad drove me to therapy. They said it would get better, but I didn't want better. I wanted Theo. I wanted to exist again in the world he lived in. I started seeing a therapist 3 times a week, not to get custody back, just to stay upright. One day she said something that stuck with me. You can't unbreak glass, but you can make a mosaic. I hated it. I rolled my eyes. But weeks later, that line came back to me, soft, insistent, like breath under a closed door. Then one day my phone rang. It was Elizabeth, my old boss, the one who hired me for strategy when no one else would. She said she'd heard what happened, that she didn't believe a word of the headlines. And then I don't want to offer you a job. I want to offer you your mind back. I didn't understand. She invited me to coffee. I showed up expecting small talk. Instead, she handed me a binder. My name on the cover, inside my work, campaigns, memos, strategy briefs, every note I ever wrote for her team. She tapped the table and said, "This is who you were. This is who you are." So what would that woman do if someone stole everything she built? I didn't answer her, not that day. But something inside me moved. Not fire, not revenge, not yet. Something older, heavier, quieter. Like the slow gathering of thunder, or the weight of a blade being forged. Elizabeth didn't hug me when I walked into her office. She just looked up from her laptop, tilted her head slightly and said, "You look like a woman who's been quiet for too long." I didn't say anything. My body still ached from the months of exhaustion. My voice, used only for pleading or apologizing lately, didn't know what to say when no one was asking me to beg. She gestured to the seat across from her. A plain folder sat waiting. Inside, pieces of me, old strategy decks I'd written during my time at her firm. Branding blueprints, campaign mock-ups, tagline sketches, dated, printed, and organized like evidence. Evidence that I had once mattered, not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a mind. Elizabeth spoke without looking at me. "I didn't keep this because I'm sentimental. I kept it because it was good work, your work, and I think it's time you start using it again." I stared at the pages. It felt like reading the diary of a dead woman. Someone I used to be, someone I had buried under compromised devotion and banana pancakes shaped like stars. "I'm not her anymore," I whispered. Elizabeth finally looked up. Her expression didn't change. "Then be better." For the next few weeks, I worked from her spare office. Nothing glamorous, just a desk, an old MacBook, and a second-hand espresso machine that made more noise than coffee. She gave me one rule: no emotion, only structure. I started small, helping nonprofit clients restructure their fundraising decks, reviewing business proposals for women-run startups, rewriting their stories, their positioning, their tone. And as I did it for them, something quietly began stitching itself back inside me. I'd wake up before sunrise, not because I couldn't sleep, because I wanted to work. I started wearing real clothes again, nothing fancy, just pants with zippers and tops with sleeves. I stopped checking David's Instagram, stopped waiting for Julia to mess up, because I wasn't waiting anymore. I was building. Then came the day Elizabeth brought in the law consultant, a woman in her 60s, calm eyes, nails sharp enough to slice paper. Her name was Dana. She asked me to walk her through the divorce, not emotionally, but factually. So I did. Every detail, the timeline, the asset split, Theo's custody, Julia's role, what I signed, what I didn't, what I assumed. Dana took notes in silence, then closed her folder. "You were set up, plain and simple." My throat tightened. The asset transfer happened before the divorce was filed. Julia's signature on those business documents' fraudulent use of power of attorney. The company removing your name before valuation illegal if you can prove timeline and contribution. Custody was biased, based on psychiatric manipulation, and you didn't have proper representation. I felt like throwing up. But Dana said none of this matters unless you want it to. I went home that night and stared at the ceiling. Theo's drawings still taped on the closet, his red sock still stuck between couch cushions from the last time he was here 3 months ago. Did I want revenge? Not really. What I wanted was recognition, that I had existed, that I had contributed, that I mattered not just as a vessel to raise a child or support a man, but as someone who built something, and that they didn't get to erase me. I started keeping 2 journals. One was visible grocery lists, therapy notes, brand drafts. The other was hidden a file titled Recovery, tucked deep in a folder labeled Pet Vaccines. In it, every document I remembered Julia printing from my laptop. Every calendar invite I'd once sent David with strategy sessions. Emails showing Julia forwarding my concept decks to her own address. Screenshots of branding now listed under Julia's startup that matched my work from 2018. Photos of Theo with timestamps proving how involved I was. In his early care, the real kind, the kind no one documents but mothers never forget. Each file, a thread, each thread, part of a net. Elizabeth noticed the change. "You're thinking 3 steps ahead now," she said. "I'm thinking legally," I replied. She smiled, not kindly, but like a general, seeing a soldier finally learn how to hold a knife properly. Good. Because they didn't just steal from you, they underestimated you. And underestimated women make the best architects of collapse. One night I passed a headline, Candescent Labs raises 4.6 in seed round. Julia's startup. David listed as strategic advisor, the company model almost identical to the one I helped him build 5 years ago. They'd rebranded it Sure, changed the tone, but the bones still mine. That night I opened a new document. Title Candescent Timeline of IP Violation. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just typed. Not as a mother, not as a woman, but as a strategist. Because for the first time in years, I saw myself again. And the woman in the mirror wasn't heartbroken. She was focused, she was precise, and she was just getting started. There's a strange moment when you walk into a room and realize no one recognizes you anymore, but they still feel you. Like the leftover hum after a song ends. That's what it felt like at my first investor mixer in 4 years. I wasn't listed, I wasn't presenting, I was just an advisor. No bio, no pitch, just a woman in a gray dress, sipping sparkling water, smiling like someone who had nothing to prove. And yet, they stared, not in recognition, in hesitation, like they'd heard something once and couldn't quite place where it came from. I watched Julia glide through the crowd in her cream suit and $3,000 bag like she owned air. Her laugh was loud, precise, honed to make you lean in. I knew every beat of her pitch before she opened her mouth. She'd start with warmth, drop a headline, frame a user problem her team solved in beta. Then she'd smile wide and say it's not just tech, it's culture. I wrote that line, not those exact words, but the cadence, the structure, the scaffolding. It was like watching someone reenact a play I drafted and forgot to copyright. 2 weeks earlier, I had sent a quiet technical review to one of their pending investors. No accusations, no drama, just product concerns, ownership questions, and a note about phrasing inconsistencies in their branding. It was unsigned, no reply expected, but I knew what hesitation looked like. That investor Archstone Group pulled their offer 3 days later. Officially, they blamed market volatility. Unofficially, a friend told me they got nervous. Someone flagged sourcing. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile, I just wrote it down in the file strike one. Elizabeth called it strategic discomfort. I called it music. Because when you learn to tune silence like a violin, even hesitation becomes a symphony. So I turned it up. I reached out to Matteo Delgado, an early-stage investor David once burned on a failed Series A. The fallout wasn't public, but I remembered. Matteo hadn't. When we met, I didn't cry. I didn't ask for pity. I showed him the architecture, the strategy, the parts behind the curtain Julia never wrote. He listened, then asked one question. Why now, I said, because they're building a house on my land. I'm not knocking. I'm buying the lot next to it and building something better. 1 month later, with Matteo's quiet backing, I helped fund a leaner competitor to Candescent. Same category, different thesis, transparent cap table, clean roadmap. And most importantly, no ghosts in the foundation. I didn't attach my name, not yet, but word spreads quickly in rooms where everyone whispers and no one forgets. Suddenly, every time Julia pitched, someone brought up that other team, the one with better documentation, similar ideas, and tighter execution. She smiled through it, but her jaw gave her away. Then came the Innovation Council dinner. Closed door, no press, invite only. Julia and David were speaking. I came as a guest of one of the council's donors. No badge, no microphone, just presence and power. Halfway through dessert, a moderator asked Julia about brand origin. And for a moment, just a fraction, she paused. It was so fast most people missed it, but I didn't. Because liars only pause when you get too close to the original story. And I was the original. Later, near the restrooms, 2 young founders passed by, whispering. Wasn't she someone's assistant, one asked. I heard she stole the whole framework from someone else. What's her name again? No clue. Weird how fast she blew up. I didn't turn around, I didn't correct them, because my name didn't need to be in the story. My silence had already entered the room ahead of me. That night, Theo drew a picture of our apartment. Stick figures, a bright yellow sun, and one sentence I'll never forget. I asked who was who. He said, "That's you. You're bigger now." I asked what he meant. He pointed. "You're standing taller. Like before you were small, now you're not." I had to turn away so he wouldn't see me cry, because it wasn't justice that made me rise. It was him. He was watching, and I needed him to see his mother as whole. By the end of the quarter, Candescent lost 2 investors. Their product delay leaked to a blog. Julia's LinkedIn posts shifted from visionary to explanatory. David still behind the curtain, but I could see the strings. They were fraying, one strand at a time. No headlines, no lawsuits, just erosion. designed, precise, irreversible. I wasn't done, not even close. This wasn't the storm, this was the tremor before it. But now I knew exactly where to strike. And that strike, it was coming next, and this time everyone would hear it. The invitation arrived on cream cardstock with gold lettering. Tech Women Rising. Honoring the top 10 female founders of the year, Julia was one of them. Of course she was. Her face had become a brand smooth skin. Clean lines, a confident tilt of the chin, like she'd never been caught off guard in her life. The kind of woman people quote. The kind of woman magazines ask, "What's your morning routine?" I didn't RSVP. I didn't need to. I'd already booked a seat in a much quieter, much more permanent way. 4 days before the event, my legal team filed a formal lawsuit. Intellectual property theft, trademark infringement, brand misappropriation, filed under my holding company, the one that now owned every early version. Of the ideas Julia was still pretending were hers, we had receipts, emails with metadata, strategy decks time-stamped years before Candescent even existed, screenshots of Julia accessing my drafts, a PDF titled, "We Can Evolve This," with this being my original model. We didn't send it to the press, we didn't need noise, just clarity. We sent it to her inbox, her board, and every investor on her cap table. The night of the gala, Julia wore white. Of course she did. She always loved purity optics, white blazer, white heels, even a white clutch. The outfit of a woman who wanted to be seen as untouchable. I watched from the mezzanine behind glass, invited as the plus one of a low-profile investor. She didn't see me, not yet, but something was off. She spoke third. Introduced with a standing ovation. She smiled, waved, and then a flicker. Not a stumble, not panic. Just a half second where her eyes moved too fast across the crowd, like she'd been warned. Her voice held steady for the first 2 minutes. The usual founder script division, disruption community. Then she reached the part where she thanked her mentors, and just for a moment she said, "And to those who pause," challenged me to grow beyond what I thought I was capable of. People clapped, but I heard it. That split-second break in the porcelain. That line wasn't gratitude, it was fear wearing heels. She knew what was coming, she just didn't know when. Later that night, just before dessert, my attorney walked into the ballroom. No fanfare, no legal drama. Just a suit, a soft smile, and an envelope. He approached her table, bent slightly, said, "Ms. Chen, I believe this is for you," and placed the formal notice of the lawsuit in front of her. No headlines, no microphone. Just the metallic clink of silverware when she paused with the envelope in her hands. Her face didn't break, but her grip did. A flinch, a breath. The kind of silence you can't recover from once it started. I didn't stay. I didn't need to see her fall apart. That wasn't the point. This wasn't for Julia. This was for the people who had been sold a false story. For the women watching, thinking she built something from scratch. For the ones who had been erased, like I had been quietly, efficiently, without fuss. This was for me 3 years ago, watching my son pose for photos in a house I used to own beside a woman I used to call my best friend. By the next morning, industry blogs were whispering. Not because I leaked anything, but because Candescent's investors started asking questions Julia couldn't answer. One quote from a VC read, "There were red flags, founding timeline inconsistencies, source documents that never quite lined up." Another blog posted a side-by-side of Candescent's site and my original work. The language, the layout, the phrasing, same skeleton. Only one of us had timestamps and filings to prove authorship. David tried to reach me. 3 missed calls. 1 message I didn't know it had gone this far. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to my attorney, added it to the folder, documented, dated, done. That week, Julia got dropped from a podcast lineup. Her keynote invitation rescinded. An investor announced they were reevaluating participation pending legal resolution. The spiral had begun, and I wasn't pushing it. I was just watching gravity finally do its work. That night, Theo asked if Julia was sick. I asked what made him say that. "She's been crying. Daddy says she's tired. She doesn't come out of the office anymore." I didn't say anything. What could I say I couldn't explain? Legal fallout to a child. Couldn't translate betrayal into bedtime stories. So I just hugged him and said, "You don't have to worry about anyone else's tears. You're safe." and that was the truth. The next morning, I stood in front of my closet. For the first time in years, I reached for the navy suit I used to wear when I was closing strategy decks, not custody motions. I zipped it up slowly, tied my hair back, looked in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't smile. She didn't need to. She wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here to survive. She was here to finish what someone else thought she'd never be strong enough to start. And this time, she wasn't going to be erased. Revenge wasn't the reason I came back. My son was. Everything else, the lawsuit, the brand, the investors, was noise compared to the silence I lived in every time Theo looked at me, like I was optional. And I could live without being a wife. I could live without my name on the company I built. But I could not live knowing that my son was being raised to think his mother disappeared because she wanted to. That's not what happened. And I was done letting people write the story for me. The custody agreement, as it stood, was a legal straitjacket. Joint on paper, yes. But Theo spent most of his time with David and Julia in the same house where I used to read him bedtime stories, now replaced by the woman who stole the role and the room. I had alternate weekends, every other holiday, and no say in educational or medical decisions. I told my attorney I wanted full custody. He hesitated. You're already winning the public narrative. Don't risk looking unstable now. But I wasn't playing for optics anymore. I was playing for my child. To win full custody, you need more than love. You need documentation. You need witnesses. You need a paper trail so airtight it can't be spun or softened. So I built one. First, I hired a family therapist, one with court-credentialed experience. Theo and I began attending weekly sessions, no drama, no agenda, just safe, quiet space. Over time, she documented subtle behavioral patterns, withdrawal when asked about his home life confusion, around parental roles, signs of emotional triangulation, especially with Julia. Next, I requested Theo's preschool records. Nothing alarming, but enough signs of anxiety and attachment disruption to begin a case. Then I went through my own texts, emails, calendar logs. All the moments I'd asked to see him and been denied. Every message ignored. Every excuse, he's tired, we're away. It's not a good time. It added up, not just to parental alienation, but to something deeper, a campaign of quiet erasure. Then came the incident. Theo was dropped off late on a Sunday. He had a bruise on his shoulder, not alarming, but noticeable. When I asked what happened, he whispered, "Julia pulled me fast. I spilled juice. My stomach twisted. I didn't scream. I didn't text threats. I took photos. Documented everything, logged the time date and his exact words. When I brought it up during the next court-mandated review session, David dismissed it. Kids fall, he bumps into things, he's clumsy, you know that. But the therapist didn't ignore it. She filed a report, so did I. We went back to court 6 weeks later. This time, I wasn't the woman trying not to cry. I was the woman who came with a binder and backup. My lawyer laid out our case with surgical precision, emotional instability, in the household, questionable co-parenting conduct, denied visitations, shifting roles without legal clarity. David's team tried to push back, painted me as obsessed vengeful, leveraging the media storm from the IP lawsuit for attention. But it didn't land. Because I wasn't loud, I wasn't angry, I was composed, clear, and prepared. Then the court-appointed evaluator took the stand. She summarized Theo's emotional regression over the past year. His language confusion about who was mom, his inability to express needs without fear of punishment. Then she looked at the judge and said, "This is not a case of a bad parent. It's a case of a mother who's been methodically replaced and a child caught in an emotional crossfire he doesn't understand." You could feel the air shift in the room. Even David blinked. 2 weeks later, the judge issued the ruling: full legal and physical custody to the mother. Visitation rights to the father, structured supervised at first, then reevaluated after 90 days. I didn't cry, not in court, not even on the drive home. But when I opened the door to our apartment and Theo ran into my arms yelling, "I'm staying with you," now that's when I broke, not in pain, in relief. He didn't know the months I spent fighting for that sentence. He just knew he was home. That night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Is Julia mad?" I paused. Then I said, "Julia is just somewhere else now, and this is where you belong." He nodded, pulled his stuffed lion into his chest, and whispered, "You smell better than her anyway." I laughed for the first time in months, not because it was funny, but because it felt like life was returning in pieces. And this piece, my son, was back where he always should have been. The next morning, David called. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't sound angry, just small. "I know I messed up. I never thought you'd win this part. I guess I forgot who you were before you became a mother." I didn't reply, because I didn't need to say it. He was right. I had forgotten too. But now I remembered, and from here on out, I would never forget myself again. It started with a text, just 2 words, "You free." I stared at the message from David for a full minute, unsure if I was imagining it. Free, now you're asking me if I'm free. There was a time when he controlled every minute of my schedule, when I had to check if I could buy groceries, when my availability was a function of his mood. Now he wanted to talk, and he didn't even have the decency to ask why directly. I didn't reply. 3 hours later, an email followed. Subject line, clarification and possible collaboration. Collaboration. That was rich. Inside, he wrote that the lawsuit had complicated things on their end, that Julia had stepped back temporarily from the company, though industry whispers said she'd been removed quietly by the board, that several investors were threatening to pull out, unless the IP situation was resolved and the public perception stabilized. Then came the pivot. "I know we've had our issues, but I'd rather resolve this amicably. I think if you issued a public statement clarifying intent, maybe even something neutral, it would help everyone heal faster. Help everyone." The man who erased me from my business, my home, my son's life, now wanted me to heal his reputation. I stared at my screen and laughed. A quiet, humorless kind of laugh, the kind that escapes when irony hits bone. I didn't write back. I forwarded the email to Dana, my attorney. "Let's make this official," I wrote. "He doesn't get direct access anymore." The next day, David showed up outside my office. Yes, physically. Wearing his nicest jacket, like charm was still currency. He looked thinner, a little tired, but the same smile. The one that once disarmed me. Not anymore. "Hey," he said. "Hi," I said. Nothing more. He looked awkward. That was new. "I'm not here to fight," he added. I don't want this to get messier." I tilted my head. "You mean you don't want people to start Googling who really built Candescent?" His jaw twitched. "They didn't get out of hand, David," I replied. "They just finally got out of your hands." He tried again. "Offered coffee, for old time's sake." I shook my head. "The woman who used to accept coffee from you doesn't work here anymore." He paused, then pulled out a folder. Inside a proposal, not for reconciliation, for licensing. Yes. David wanted to license my IP and the very ideas he once claimed weren't mine. He even used corporate language like mutually beneficial win-win positioning and reputational synergy. I slid the folder back across the table. "You're late." He blinked. Late for what? The part where I might have cared. That afternoon, Dana sent him an official cease communication notice. All contact had to go through legal channels. No more emails, no more drop-ins, no more coffees. And just to be thorough, I attached a handwritten note to the envelope. "You taught me how to play this game. I just learned how to win it without ever raising my voice." 3 days later, word spread that David had resigned from his advisory role. Investors cited loss of trust, internal instability, and unresolved legal ambiguity. He wasn't ousted. He was squeezed out quietly, slowly, inevitably. Julia had already vanished. David followed. Candescent still existed, but it was now being dismantled and restructured without either of them. Ironically, I'd end up working with a new board, consulting anonymously, of course helping them stabilize and rebuild under completely new leadership. They didn't need to know everything, just enough to know who not to trust again. A week later, Theo and I were drawing spaceships on the floor. He looked up suddenly and asked, "Is Daddy in trouble?" I hesitated. "Why do you ask?" Because he looked sad on the phone. He said he made big mistakes. I nodded. He did. "Are you mad at him?" I thought about that. About all the things I could say. "I'm not mad," I said finally. "I'm done." He smiled. Like that made perfect sense. Then he handed me a crayon and said, "You draw the stars, I'll do the fire." That night I realized something. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it doesn't even speak at all. It just doesn't need permission anymore. I used to think power was about being heard. Then I learned it's about not needing to explain yourself ever again. And David, he no longer got access to my voice, my space, or my time. He asked for help. I sent a lawyer. My name doesn't trend. It isn't attached to a brand. I don't do interviews. I don't post carousel quotes about resilience. But if you know how to look, really look, you'll see me everywhere. Behind the brands that pivoted gracefully, inside the systems that survived crises, sitting silently on advisory boards where no one dares underestimate me. I never became famous. I became unremovable. It's been 2 years since the lawsuit was settled. Julia signed the agreement herself. No eye contact, just a pen in a shaking hand. She didn't fight it. There was nothing left to fight with. Candescent was dismantled and restructured under new leadership. I was asked quietly to help reposition it for acquisition. I accepted, not because I wanted the company, but because I wanted the final fingerprint on its future to be mine. David moved to Denver, freelance consultant. He's not a bad person, people still say. He just got caught up in ambition, fell for the wrong woman, made some bad bets. I don't correct them, let them soften him. I'm done writing his story. I've reclaimed mine. Theo is 6 now. He knows I'm his mother, not just biologically, but actively. He knows I pick him up, that I show up, that I stay. One day we were walking to school and he said, "You used to be quiet all the time, now you smile more." I asked, "Does that make me better or worse?" He thought for a second. "It makes you scarier, but only to the bad guys." I laughed, but he was right. I own a consulting firm now, all-women team, no public-facing identity. We specialize in cleaning up messes. We advise women in boardrooms, courtrooms, and private crises ones, where silence and intelligence are the only weapons allowed. I've sat across from billion-dollar CEOs who didn't know I built the leverage their opponent used. I've watched men like David flinch when they realize someone smarter has been in the room longer than they thought. And I never say, "It was me." I just nod and invoice. I see Julia sometimes, not in person, on LinkedIn, in articles, guest writing pieces for lifestyle blogs about resilience after loss. She speaks about reinvention. She doesn't name names, but I know she's still performing. She always needed an audience. I never did. The last time David tried to contact me, it was to ask if Theo could attend a family reunion on his side. I declined. He didn't argue. He just wrote back, "I don't blame you." And that was the first honest thing he'd ever said to me. Sometimes people ask me if I forgave them, him, her, myself, and the truth, I didn't forgive. I simply no longer carry the wreckage. I left the debris where it fell, and I walked forward. The world wants you to believe that women heal by being soft, by letting go, by choosing peace. But I didn't heal by letting go. I healed by outlasting, by standing in the ashes they left me in and building fireproof skin. Now when I walk into a room, I don't demand respect. I don't need to. The ones who understand power can smell it before you speak. And the ones who don't, they don't matter. One afternoon, I ran into someone who used to work with David and Julia. She didn't recognize me at first. She said, "You remind me of someone who used to be married to David Chen." God, what was her name? I smiled, "She's doing well," and walked away. Because that was the truth. I wasn't reborn. I wasn't reinvented. I didn't need to rise like some poetic phoenix. I just refused to stay buried. I stood up, dusted off the dirt, and kept walking straight through the wreckage, not toward revenge, but toward the life they thought I could never live without them. You want a happy ending? This is as happy as it gets. I don't miss anyone. I don't fear anything. I sleep through the night, and when I wake up, I am no longer waiting to be remembered. I am impossible to forget.